Brent, I appreciate you making some time for us this morning. I know how exhausted you must be staying up. It was funny to see as soon as you had a question in the press conference with Jimbo yesterday, you had just a horde of media following you after that. So I appreciate you making some time for us. You're thinking this is going to happen in the next couple weeks, an announcement, it looks like.
Yeah, my big plan yesterday was to cover Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher, Mike Leach, and then go do some karaoke with the crew. But it didn't exactly go that way, and all of this kind of came at me pretty hard and fast. And this process has been in the works for a little while at the highest levels. And what I was told is that their plan, there might even be an announcement within 2 or 3 weeks that Texas and Oklahoma are joining the SEC.
So what would the timeline be? When we say joining, that doesn't mean this year, obviously. Would it be a couple of seasons? What is your understanding of when the timeline would be that they would break away from the existing Big 12 and become full-fledged members of the SEC?
Yeah, their TV rights are through 2025, but as we've seen, those things can change in a hurry. And I have a little bit of discipline in this and having covered A&M's move a decade ago and how the plan was very early on that the A&M would spend, like 2012 in the Big 12 as kind of a lame duck. Well, along the way, that just got really awkward for both sides. The Big 12 didn't want A&M once they realized it was a done deal and they were leaving, and A&M certainly didn't want to be in the Big 12. So things picked up, and next thing you know, they're all agreeing to sever ties a little early. And so A&M, Bo and Lofton, it was interesting, the former A&M president had made the announcement that the Big 12 was in a state of uncertainty. That was 10 years ago yesterday to the day that everything broke, and then for A&M, everything accelerated in terms of their move. So certainly with the news coming out, I think this might accelerate things as far as Texas and Oklahoma. To answer your question, I don't think, something like this stretches out to 2025 in terms of the move. I would guess within a couple of years if it's going to happen. And certainly from everything I've heard and from everything I've learned over the past couple of days, it looks like it's going to happen.
So are Texas and Oklahoma an absolute package deal? Are they going this together and you get both or none? How are they presenting this to the SEC? And I assume if it doesn't work out here, it would be on to the Big Ten or the ACC or the Pac-12. Is that how this is being packaged?
My understanding. Yeah, that there are a package and that it's definitely the SEC. That's the plan. And from the SEC's end, if they're looking to become the first super conference with 16 teams, Texas and Oklahoma are no-brainers on that front. I guess you look east and say possibly like a North Carolina, Virginia, and so forth. But if you're talking football, you're talking about adding two of the traditional powerhouses. I'm not going to say they're both been powerhouses lately, obviously. But on that front, it really strengthens the league, in terms of getting to those 16 teams. So, yeah, they're a package deal, OU and Texas, and that plan has been, that's something that's been worked on behind the scenes for a little while now for this summer, with the idea that they would join the SEC and make it its first, the first super conference in the nation.
Brent Zwenermen, if I could say, Brent Zwenermen with us of the Houston Chronicle. Brent, I think one of the questions Ross Bjork on the SEC Network on Paul Fahm yesterday was adamantly against the idea of adding Texas. What other schools within this conference do you think would be against adding the Sooners and the Longhorns?
I'm not sure that in the end they might not be a lone ranger on this. I guess, I've heard Missouri might have reservations, maybe Arkansas based on recruiting and so forth, or possibly LSU, but I don't think so. I think that they're going to look at it from the perspective of saying this is a necessity, in terms of adding these two to make it, a super conference and to make the most powerful conference in the nation, solidify that role for the foreseeable future. So, the Aggies obviously they wanted to be the standalone SEC representative in the state of Texas. And, as Ross Bjork was, and By the way, there was some thought that was all orchestrated. I don't think so. I think Bjork was just kind of wanting to take in SEC media days, and it all just kind of happened to hit the fan with the Aggies on board. So then he was there to answer questions. So I don't think that was all some big orchestration on the Aggies' part. But yeah, my understanding is that the SEC would get the 11 of the 14 votes necessary to go ahead and add OU and Texas.
I know a school that's not happy about this is Oklahoma State. Now, I did have a question. I thought legislation inside of Oklahoma that if Oklahoma and Oklahoma State ever had to move conferences, they had to do it together. And I know Oklahoma State had a statement. They came out. They're gathering information. If it's true, they're gravely disappointed. Brent, where does Oklahoma State find itself in all of this?
Yeah, and that's not those two do not have to be tied together. I think maybe in the old days they did somehow, some way.
Okay.
But that's no longer the case in terms of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. You might see a situation with Oklahoma State that you saw with Baylor a decade ago, with A&M. Baylor did everything it could because it thought, okay, if the Aggies are leaving, if Missouri's leaving, possibly Texas to the Pac-12 and so forth, that they were going to be left kind of whipping in the wind. So they started threatening litigation, everything possible to try to stop A&M from moving to the SEC at that time. And I certainly could see Oklahoma State trying to do that, but I think that the results would be the same, where finally Baylor realizes that, it wasn't going to be successful in all these lawsuits. Ken the Star was the guy behind that.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly I could see Oklahoma State trying to go that direction, but also see where, it's going to be really hard for them to slow this big rolling train at this point.
Yeah. Brett, generally when conferences expand, it's to expand their footprint. Now, obviously, the SEC is not in the state of Oklahoma, but you look at the expansion of the SEC network, which is huge for ESPN and the SEC's revenue. Where would the expansion be revenue-wise from a television standpoint when you feel like you've already got those Texas markets that A&M brought along with it? Yes, Oklahoma City and Tulsa are nice markets, but they're not the biggest TV markets in the South. So how does the league go to ESPN and ask for more money and revamp this deal they've been negotiating when really you don't expand the footprint that much? You do bring two powerhouse household names to the table, but does it bring really more subscribers for the SEC network and your digital footprint and so forth?
I believe so. Well, of course, Oklahoma has a huge following, obviously the flagship university in that state. It would be a huge addition for Texas, and as a guy having grown up as a fifth-generation Texan, I obviously realize the two flagship universities in the state are Texas A&M and Texas, and they have a huge following, and I would think that this would also be a way for Texas to kind of mesh or dissolve the Longhorn network into the SEC network, if that makes sense. This would be a way for them to unload that make sure I'm saying this right here, that boondoggle that it has become over the past decade. Obviously it hasn't been the success that they had hoped for, so that would also play into it, both from ESPN's perspective and the University of Texas' perspective. But, I mean, you're talking about a huge following, and the other part of that is the renewing of that rivalry of A&M versus Texas would be massive. It would not just be massive for the state of Texas and for those universities, but also for the SEC. I mean, you talk about something that's been missed big time over the past decade in the state of Texas. And so I think from that perspective, they're all trying to look forward and saying the times are changing in a big way, with everything that's going on with NIL, with the expansion of the playoffs, which also plays into this because they feel like that would increase their chances of making the playoffs, a team like Texas, for instance, or Oklahoma in that situation. Yeah. So all those things play into the idea of both Oklahoma and Texas and then the SEC trying to be forward thinkers here and try to be that first super conference by adding two traditional powerhouses.
All right, last one. Any chance of survival for the Big 12 if Texas and OU leave? This seems like certain death for that conference if this pans out the way we're hearing.
It certainly seems like, and then you look at a program like Baylor, here they are, they won a men's basketball national title. They've kind of gotten things going their way, really nice stadium right on the river there, and Texas Tech.